All right, good afternoon and welcome to today's technology-filled session of NATSO Live. My name is Amy Toner and I'm NATSO's Vice President, Publishing and Digital Content. I'm so excited to be here today and offer some more education for NATSO members. Before I go over a few of our notes, I'm going to pass it over to Pamela Hayes, NATSO's Vice President, Business Development. Pamela and I work together to bring the right education and the right vendors. So take it away, Pamela.
Thank you, Amy. It's my pleasure to thank our sponsors. McLean has generously sponsored today's educational session. McLean is a supply chain services leader providing grocery and food service supply chain solutions for travel centers. McLean optimizes the purchase, flow, and sale of products from thousands of suppliers to more than 54,000 retail locations. Jeff Opp is with us, and he'll tell us a little bit more about McLean in just a few minutes. I also want to give a big thank you to our title sponsors, Catscale and Federated Insurance. Without their support, it would not have been possible for us to have the Summer of NATSO Connections. So thank you to both Catscale and Federated. Catscale has more than 2,000 locations across the US and Canada. There are no startup costs, and equipment, maintenance, and training are provided. So if you do not have a Catscale at your location, you need to get in touch with them. Federated Insurance is marketing representatives know the travel plaza business very well, and they can offer correct and specific coverage, service, and risk management support based on your needs. Also, as you can see, DAS has sponsored our backgrounds all week, and DAS Companies is a full service marketing and supply chain portfolio company. Privately held, DAS Companies designs, imports, and distributes truck and auto supplies, travel gear, mobile electronics that offer safety, convenience, comfort, and connectedness to our consumers. So thank you to all of our sponsors. Back to you, Amy.
Okay, thanks, Pamela. All right, folks, just a few reminders. Make sure your line is muted during the presentation. We're going to take questions at the end, so drop them in the chat at any time. We want those questions. We want this to be as interactive as possible. After the presentation, our own Darren Schulte, he's Vice President Membership, is going to be our moderator. He has a tough act after Christine yesterday, but I know Darren's up for it with lots of good questions. Okay, now it's my pleasure to turn over to Jeff Opp with McLean, our sponsor.
So thank you, Amy. As Pamela mentioned, those of you who may not be familiar with McLean, we are one of the nation's largest broadline suppliers of convenience store and grocery items in the United States. Also a proud supporter of NATSO, the Chairman Circle member. We have been for several years now. McLean has 24 divisions across the United States, servicing a large variety of convenience stores, travel plazas, truck stops, everywhere from large national chains to independent operators. Through that, we do over 3.5 million deliveries every year. And it's safe to say we're in about every zip code in the country at least once a week. One of the advantages, particularly with the larger type operators that we service, is the centralized procurement national pricing structure of McLean. It's one of the things that sets us apart. What that means for our larger chains that pull from several different distribution centers is a very uniform, almost systematic approach to doing business. When you think about things like new brand launches, timeliness of getting items into your stores, that's where the push of a button at headquarters and centralized procurement really come into play. If you look at things like cigarettes and confections, for example, almost a third of those types of items sold in the United States go through a McLean warehouse, which certainly speaks to the vendor relationships and buying power that McLean has, which we leverage quite often to service our customers with both pricing and opportunities that we can allow, and our customer-focused technology. We have about 200 IT professionals that work within McLean, developing a lot of solutions, most of which come from our customers requesting the capability to do this or that. Some of those on the screen now launched this year, or some of our most recent with things like the delivery tracker or sometimes called "Where's my truck" or "Where's my delivery," but allows our customers to know almost down to the minute where their delivery is via the app and when it's going to arrive at the store from either the store level or from the home office level. Also offering things like default ordering and inventory control. The loyalty app is another function that we launched just a few months ago. It went live, but it allows our customers to have their own loyalty program completely branded to the particular account. Does not look generic at all to McLean, but driven by McLean, serviced by McLean. And those of you that may have a loyalty for your particular store now knows how costly that can be. So it's another way that McLean uses our technology to make lives a little easier and less expensive for our store operators. So, and speaking of technology, one more point. If you'd like to learn more about who we are and what we're doing here at McLean, please reach out to me. My cell phone number and email address is on the screen there. And with that, it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today, Justin Baxely. Justin is Vice President of Retail Product Management for PDI. He leads a team of product managers. He has taught, supported, and designed PDI products since 2010. In his current role, he explores the challenges and opportunities facing the retail convenience community and aids in the process of turning shared experience and expertise into new and innovative solutions. So welcome, Justin.
Hi, my name is Justin Baxely. I'm the Vice President of Retail Product Management at PDI. Here at PDI, we make business software for fuel wholesalers and retail convenience stores, trying to inject some energy back into that world. And as part of that, we spend a lot of time thinking about technology. And I like to think that we've spent a good time thinking about that in very practical ways, you know, in terms of finding technology as a thing that actually produces solutions rather than just produces profits for the people who make the technology. And so what I want to talk to you about today is that as we explore trends in things like retail automation or labor savings or ways to use some of those exciting new words like AI, right? You know, and they're not terribly new if we're really honest with ourselves, but they get a little buzzy and they get a little markety and we get excited about them. What I want to think about is ways in which technology becomes a tool in partnership with humanity, right? So I want to talk about technology as a human partnership. And I sort of joked with myself about whether or not we were going to talk about cybernetic organisms, right? Like the Terminator, where we start to combine, you know, the human being and the technology into some kind of better than human or stronger than human or scarier than human thing. But the reality of it is that it already exists. The first time you watch a 3-year-old automatically interface with a touch device and know how to work it, the fact that organically we've got young people who know how to use search engines because they've been using them their whole lives and sort through them in ways that older people sometimes don't organically interface with the same result set, knowing how to find exactly what they're after, right? We've got essentially cybernetic organisms, people whose whole lives have been interfaced with technology. Sometimes that's been really good and sometimes it's been really bad, right? So you got kids that have never really known what it was like to live outside the matrix and feel somewhat socially and psychologically enslaved to that stuff. And the fact that we've seen both of those kind of play out in that way is the reason why I want to think about this as a human partnership. We want technology to be something that works for us, not something that we're enslaved to financially, spending lots of money on not getting any results, or contrary-wise, something that actually makes our lives worse. And I want to talk about a few different examples of that, and then kind of think about, okay, based on all the things that we explore, turn around and say, hey, what does that mean for us? How do we start to target and look for those ways in which technology expands and enriches our lives and our businesses and our productivity, rather than just becomes this thing we're chasing that doesn't really ever get us anywhere. Kind of the rainbow, the pot of gold underneath the rainbow. First one I want to do is this. Can you tell me what this is? I'm going to pause real quick because it's probably very hard for you to look through the obstructing images on the top of the picture and tell me what this is. You're probably thinking to yourself, well, it's a man and he's got gray hair and he seems to be working on a bicycle, right? The reason why I put all these gobbledygook rapidly laid over pieces of honeycomb on top of this is because the Google algorithm that inspects YouTube videos for inappropriate content could not tell you what this is. And that's why Google's really struggling to not have phishing hackers post inappropriate content with links saying, hey, if you want an unobscured version of this really wonderful video, click this link down here, which will actually install malware on your computer, right? So what happens instead is that those videos have to get reported by human beings, and they're slowly and steadily trying to make progress through their detection algorithm to find those things. And so in the meantime, what you've got is these sometimes illegal and sometimes really horrible videos getting posted to YouTube. And the only thing capable of detecting it is not the AI, it's not the machine learning, it's you, right? Now let's go another layer deeper than this, because obviously you didn't have any problems. Those obstructions didn't restrict your ability to identify the man, the chair behind him, the bicycle. Your brain and the neural net kind of involved in it is so advanced and so complex that your ability to interpret it, even through the noise, was really powerful, right? So what about this one? Let's talk about this. Same picture, no obstructions. Can you tell me what's wrong with this picture? And I've had a few different reactions to that when I've asked human beings. A few things that people have said is, hey, it doesn't look like he's sitting on a chair, but there's a chair like immediately behind him. And that's kind of an interesting observation, because he kind of seems to be floating in the air. He's probably got a nice workbench stool or something, but it does look a little funny. Computer wouldn't detect that, right? Computer learning, computer vision wouldn't detect that. The second thing, if you notice, is he's got his Leatherman out with the needle nose pliers. He's pinching on the tire. And I really want to think about that for a second, because you got to have like a series of expectations or experiences for you to know that that's wrong, right? Like if I'm using just computer associations and things like that, I look at that and I see he's got tool, he's got bike, man. I'm going to work that together. I've got connotations of he's working, right? He's probably working on it. But that's a terrible tool to use on a terrible place on a bicycle, and all he's going to do is damage it. He's no practical reason for him to do that. And on top of it, it's a tool that's going to cause damage to the part of the bike that he's working on. So anybody that's done any amount of work on a bicycle should probably be able to tell you that too. In fact, that tool probably would be a terrible tool to even use on the lugs or any other part of the bike, because it's really a very rough set of pliers that are going to damage even the metal parts. So all that to say, you go, well, now what you've got is another thing that really any kind of computer vision is not going to be great at determining. Now, if you had the computer vision go through unobscured pictures and try to find you all the pictures that contained a man, it's going to do a much better job of going through hundreds or thousands or even millions of pictures and finding the one that contains a man. It's going to do that better than we are, right? That's a space where the speed at which it's going to be able to do that and the accuracy at which it's going to be able to do that is higher. So we find a place in which it's going to do something better. But if we said, hey, computer vision, tell me what's wrong with this picture, it's going to go, I don't know, right? So we've got this place in which you're capable of doing something better, right? And so we talk about these tests about what something can and what it can't do. We know that's sort of why same thing that we do the robot, I'm not a robot test, the reCAPTCHA testing when you log into something, is what they're trying to do is they're trying to eliminate the fact that you're a machine, right? Like they need to say, hey, are you a machine or not? And there's some pretty grotesque or really disturbing stories about similar things that have happened throughout history, right? Where so there's the story of the shibboleth, right? Where you had this one tribe. They all spoke the same language, but the one tribe couldn't make the sh sound. And so when they were doing battle with them, they escaped and they're crossing the river trying to get away. And so they just essentially camped out on one side of the river and made everybody say the word shibboleth. And if they could say shibboleth instead of sibboleth, then they knew they were good guys just trying to cross the river. And, if they said the other way, then they knew, okay, these guys are not on the right team, and they killed them instantly, right? But we do the same thing in technology, right? Because sometimes the computers are the bad guys. And when the computers are the bad guys trying to get in, we want to use this toolkit that says, hey, I know things you're not good at, computer. I know that as a bot, you're not good at being able to read a word that I've obscured in a strange way, but you don't have any problem reading, I swear I'm not a robot, right? Now, I'll tell you, I've seen some really funny examples where they stump the humans, right? But that's part of the reason why they got multiple examples, is that if the human's eventually going to get it right, the bot will never get it right. And so part of what we have to do is we start thinking about technology enriching our lives instead of being something that we're sort of, and again, I'm going to say dominated by either financially, psychologically, whatever, is by identifying the things that the technology does to enrich our productivity and enrich our lives and eliminating it in all the places where really just humans would do a better job, right? Finding the right combination of the two, maybe even not eliminate's not even the right word, I mean, just finding the right combination of the two, optimizing the combination of humans and technology so that the people and the things that the people do best are combined, and that the technology and the things that technology do best are combined. This is not like business isn't the only place where people have started to think about this. I think personal lives, because personal lives can be so invasive and oppressive, and because of the disruptions of the last 14 months of the pandemic, people have started to look at consumer technology this way, right? And so, you look at startups like Lightphone, which basically say, hey, here's a phone that we intend for you to use very little, because people had gotten so psychologically exhausted by their technology invading their lives. So these guys invented a phone that uses e-ink, and it's got a phone on it, and it will let you do text messaging. And this isn't a plug, but I personally am a user of a Lightphone because I found that there were the right tools for the right places, and I found that the technology wasn't serving me. I was anxious about my work email. I was anxious about the little blue light telling me I needed to touch a button and confirm something or find something out, and I just moved on. I'll tell you another one that kind of lines up with that from a consumer technology perspective. If you search, is it cool not to, do you know what the first thing that comes up? Not to have social media, right? Because you've got, again, all this whole crowd of people who've never lived outside the matrix, and they wonder, is there some way in which I can be cool and not participate in this, right? Because it's become psychologically oppressive. But as we think through this, then we say, okay, well, we're not trying to solve people's personal lives. We're not trying to give people psychological well-being. We're not trying to transform human existence again, but we are trying to transform our businesses. And we don't want to be bamboozled by these people who have buzzwords. And so then the question we have to ask is what are the problems that really can be solved and can be solved well? And it's possible that even some of these things we're talking about here, eventually the technology can be transformed to do a better job of these things. But in the meantime, we have to, one, acknowledge where we're at and look at the solutions where we know the technology is really well suited to solving the problems and get it right, as opposed to assuming that if somebody says AI, that it's automatically going to do a great job. So as going through this, one of the things I got to thinking about was when we start to think about a human partnership, we have to think about places and ways in which labor, we have to shift from thinking about labor as an expense to labor being an asset, right? Labor being something that we get some advantage out of because the technology can't do everything quite as well as the humans can be. And walking through that, there's just a few things inside that, in this harmonious relationship we're trying to think of between people and technology, where if we think of it exclusively as an expense, if we think of labor exclusively as an expense, we're going to take things very, very differently, right? Because we're going to think of things like, how do I eliminate FTEs? Right? That's one of the business mindsets that comes when labor is only an expense and we never see it as an asset or something that has alternative value to something like technology. We're going to see, how do we eliminate full-time employees? How do we eliminate labor expenses? How do we eliminate labor costs? As opposed to thought processes that come around seeing labor as an asset in certain contexts, they're going to look at how to optimize the allocation of those human resources to the right places. Right? So there are times where you go, it does not make sense to use a human to do something that technology always does better. And if your first impulse is that all that labor is an expense to me, then your impulse is going to be to eliminate that labor. But if you can realize that actually that labor can be reallocated into spaces where humans do a better job than technology, then you start to thinking about how to optimize your labor and technology allocations, right? That's a very different mindset than just pure labor elimination. Another one, when you think of labor as an expense versus an asset, is that we think about automation as a replacement for human beings. And in certain contexts, you're never going to very successfully replace humans. What you really need to be able to do is use technology as a way to augment human capabilities. Right? So that offset, again, it's a different mentality, because what you're going to do is there's still going to be contexts where you want to eliminate the human because they're never going to do as good of a job, right? And then there's other contexts where you go, really, I want to augment the human beings with tools and technology in certain contexts where the human really is better but could use some assistance, right? And so again, trying to see it as both. Like sometimes labor is just an expense, and sometimes labor is something that just needs to be replaced by technology. But in the process, if we can think of the fact that the human beings have the asset sort of quality on the other side, where they're really adding a value that the technology never can, then we start to see, how do we redirect the human value towards the things where it's always going to be more valuable than the technology. I think the number of things we see that we could kind of throw into this conversation is pretty high, right? Which is, let's just go through a few samples from the 20th and 21st centuries where we kind of ran into it and went, we just can't quite get there as well. One of those is sort of customer service, right? At the end of the day, the phone system where you press 1 now for this, press 2 now for this, the cost of the human being may be higher, and we may still choose to always go with a more automated customer service option there. But the ability to talk to an actual human who understands your problem still becomes one of the number one pieces of feedback in any kind of customer service system, is that if they actually get to talk to a human, that becomes a huge impact on their experience of the customer service. Because a lot of times they go, well, there's a nuance to what I'm struggling with, or I can't figure out the option that I need to pick to get there. And even as we've added search engines and the self-help behind that, a lot of times there's still a point where there's a level of frustration where somebody just needs to talk to a human, and the computer can't achieve that. They can't achieve the sense of compassion that people get from talking to a human, or the nuances that sometimes aren't there in a search engine or a multi-option index, right? I'll give you another one. Psychologically, most of our customers have to wrestle with their humanity, right? And there may be layers of efficiency that are highly achievable with technology that will never actually increase our sales, because there's a point where there's a human psychological threshold that's being hit by the efficiency itself. I'll give you 2 honking examples of that. In the food production process in the 20th century, we achieved a place where we could make, in a blind test, 2 identical cakes, one of which was add water only, and one of which you had to put an egg, half a cup of oil, and some milk, okay? Now, these 2 cakes, if you were blind testing them, again, the people tasting them would think they were identical. But if you weren't blind testing them and you made the people make the cake first, and they made both cakes, and then they ate them, they would say that the one that they had to put the egg and the oil and the milk into tasted better than the one in which they just put water in. Now explain that. It's not rational from an objective perspective, but it is real. And you, as someone trying to reach a consumer and get some portion of their wallet, get some portion of their loyalty, that psychological aspect of them is an important part of it. The other one in the food industry and really it's food and technology intersection again in the 20th century that occurred was that there came these opportunities to do a greater and greater degree of food vending. And psychologically, what we found was that consumers are deeply averse to the freshness of anything in a vending machine. So if anything's not shelf stable in a vending machine, the human tendency is to have a greater and greater degree of distrust for it. And it doesn't take long for anybody to remember the vending machines with the sandwiches, with the twist coins. And you just look at that and you go, I just don't care if there's any indicator on this thing when it was made. I just don't know how long it's been sitting there or what it's going to be like. And so you start to hear the rumors of, people getting food poisoning and various things like that. Now, have we gone some strides from there? Yes. Has vending gone in different directions? Are there ways to convey freshness psychologically even while doing some vending? Absolutely, on all those fronts. But at the same time, you have to sort of figure out how to tap into that association of freshness back to, the fact that most of us get our fresh food when other humans make them for us in our homes, right? So very psychological, very strange, but very real. So again, another take on this that has a pretty good intersection of what we're doing. I want to kind of wrap this up by kind of talking about some categories here. And I've kind of broke this into human free, human allocation, and human augmentation. Because this is this place where we start to create that really harmonious picture of humanity and technology where we take the best of both and start to figure out what is the problem we're trying to solve and how does the thing that we're trying to solve fit into this? What is the goal we're trying to achieve and how does this fit into this matrix of human value, humanity as an asset, and the things that really humans are just not great at, and we really need to find a way to let the machines loose on it and let them do amazing things for us, right? And in that human-free bucket, I've put a few things. Identification. I'll give you a great example from the convenience industry. People aren't good at identifying what item they're looking at. We know that. When people were doing carbon copy transfers, when people were doing POS register based on register department rings, that stuff doesn't work well because people aren't good at knowing exactly what they're looking at just by a quick glance. I mean, we can generally do a generalized identification better, but we're never going to get as good as a barcode embedded on the side of that product with a laser reader or an imager reader. You're just never going to be that good. And you definitely can't cross-reference that back to some master data set instantly, right? Humans are not, and part of that identification thing, we know humans are not great at remembering any numbers greater than 3 or 4 digits long, right? That's why we break our phone numbers and our national identifier numbers and all those things into pieces, because that's just the way our cognitive function works. Whereas, you want to hand a computer a 120 character string and let it go match to another 120 character string, high five. It's really quite good at that. Calculations. Humans are really great at calculations and even abstractions that can generate new calculations. Mathematicians do great things. There's no calculation a computer can do hardly that didn't start with a human being at some point, either providing foundational data to come up with it or enabling technology or something. So at some point we have to kind of give some credit to the humans, but the computers are better at the calculation itself. They're going to be faster. And as we start talking about this algorithm generations or even the solving of these problems that they've got behind the Bitcoin mining or various things like that, it's going to do a better job, right? Like that's why calculators are invented, because we already knew we were slow and we thought, how do we get faster at this? That's why we built the abacuses and the other tools that we built throughout history to get better at it, because we're slow and we're inaccurate. That's things we know we're bad at. We can do it, but we're slow and we're inaccurate. Mass reconciliation, right? There's just no human being I know that can scan through 10,000 line items in nanoseconds. That's just not possible. It's just not a thing that we're good at. And so we got to find ways to exit these things. Affinities and indexing, again, large data set scans and trying to figure out things that are like each other based on that. We're never going to be good at that. Let's stop pretending we will be. No reason to waste time on that. All right. Then there becomes things where we go, okay, look, we know there's human value, but we can augment that human value. And even some of those things over in identification, for example, kind of comes in a human augmentation as we sort of add tools that helps a human who's interacting with somebody, and they're not really adding value from an identification perspective, but they are from a customer service, from a psychological perspective, adding some value to those interactions, helping create some customer loyalty. Human allocation is one of those, again, where there's high human value in certain contexts, but what we want to do is make sure we're getting the right amount of humans in the right places, doing the right things. And so when you start thinking about like dispatching and scheduling, we often still need a human to go do something, but the systems and the technology can help us do a much better job of getting the right people to the right place at the right time and get the right amount of people to meet the right demand at the right time, to meet the vast variety of tasks that they've got to do. Right. So you got this situation where it's like getting to the people to the places, that's a big deal. And the technology can help us in a way that really we're sometimes not very good at. And as you start talking about this stuff, a few concrete examples on this one. There's some studies on logistics around grocery distribution in the 20th century that essentially found that part of the reason why you couldn't find decent food in New York City was because every single piece of food that arrived on Manhattan Island actually crossed the island 23 times before it wound up in a store. Because humans were manually managing the logistics of getting that food back and forth. And we had not come up with more efficient dispatching and logistics software at that point. And so there's a lot of really tough things that you go, man, like we're not really great at that, but getting the human to move this stuff around, or, eventually even if you eliminate the human from the delivery process, which is not really great today, the completely autonomous stuff, you go, okay, while I've still got a human in there, at least make the human better at what they're doing. Inside the scheduling process, we look at stores, there's certain interactions, certain processes that are just easier inside there. The funny reference I was thinking about this one is that there's a point in one of the newer James Bond movies where the Q character basically explains that he can do more damage with his laptop and his pajamas before he's had his first cup of tea than Bond could do. And Bond says, okay, why do you need me still? And he makes the point, he says, well, sometimes you still need to pull a trigger, right? And so in the same way, while we can do a lot of stuff as we go to the right, the more sometimes that we want to get a human to the right place at the right time, that may becomes sort of a similar metaphor, right? How do we get to the right people to the right places so they can do the things that they do well? As you get further to the right, this human augmentation, this thing becomes the place where we say, hey, look, the computer can't do this thing for us, but the human can. The computer can't see all the variables, but the human can. But let's get the computer to do the most of the work that we can, the maximum amount of value we can get out of it, and then let the human kind of help us guide through it. So exception resolution is a great example. We can't necessarily tell you what's wrong, but sometimes can tell you something is going wrong over there, right? And the human can go and go, oh, I know what's happening, right? A great example of this is printer and copy machine technology. Still not really great at self-resolving jams, right? If something does go south inside a machine, a lot of times they're still not great at fixing it themselves, because what's happened is essentially you've got a piece of material jammed up in something that's intended for nothing to ever get stopped in it. And so in the event that it does get stopped, Ultimately, what that machine's really good at doing, though, is telling you, hey, open this section here, pull that piece of paper out. And if you can, then usually everything goes back to working like clockwork again. Things like production planning, suggestive ordering, I think are really great examples as well as you start thinking about human augmentation. Because what you wrestle with there is there's all these complex demand trends, and we can use the systems at work and the algorithms at work and AI and various things to come in and say, hey, look, these are the factors that affect demand, and so therefore this is what it looks like you ought to be buying to meet demand, and this is what it looks like you ought to be making to meet demand. But what that system can't know is, we always call this like the busload of Boy Scouts, right? You know, you've got this whole crowd of people that shows up and wipes your supply out. The computer can give you some just in time on that, but the human sees them coming. And while you might arrive at some point where we're using cameras and like this absolute almost techno-fascist control state where we're watching every single variable and we can detect those things, we're not today. And in that moment where your food manager can look out the window and say, we're about to get hit hard, go back and start some more, that in combination with a production plan that's generally predicted a solid picture of your demand throughout the day, the combination of the two is better than either one of them by themselves. And that's the picture that together we're really trying to get at, is places where we can identify the places where the technology is going to do it better by itself, and places where we can see how technology can come to enhance and enrich the productivity and lives of human beings by doing what it does well and letting us do what we do well. I appreciate your time today.
Thanks for the presentation, and also thank you for staying on board a little bit for us to do a Q&A. Greatly appreciate it.
Sure.
I want to make sure, though, before we go a little bit forward, that we thank our title sponsors, Catskills and Federated Insurance, and we also appreciate McLean and DAS for supporting our education throughout this week. So I've got to go ahead, and I'm going to go ahead and ask you a question that I think a lot of our members on here will find interesting. So we've got kind of two sets of operators out there. One that say they don't have enough information. They need more and more information. They're constantly saying that. And the other is saying, I have too much information. In fact, I've got like a data disorder. I've got paralysis because I have so much information, I don't know what to do with it. So my first question really to you is, what kind of guidance would you give anyone, regardless of where they are on the scale of technology? What kind of guidance might you give someone to start, utilizing the technology?
Yeah, I mean, I think the number one question is you have to start somewhere, right? Like that's sort of the answer that I think with a lot of these things is that if in almost anything where we're wrestling with where the technology can be really helpful for us, a lot of times if you look at the big picture is actually about 27, 28 million different problems, right? And so as we start to sort something out, a lot of times I'll tell people, even when we're troubleshooting some small piece of the technology, is you've got to isolate something enough that you can really focus on it to get through there. And so, I always tell people that the word gremlin didn't exist before the 1600s, because when your wagon breaks and all the wagon is like an axle and two wheels, you go, oh, that's the part that's broken, right? But when you start seeing something like a printing press or, any of the systems that we've got, if you look at a truck stop or a travel center, they're basically campuses, right? And so you start to look at these pieces and parts and components and you say, I've got 99 problems. Which one am I going to chase first? And a lot of times we'll stick in a spot where we're thinking about all 99 and you can't hit all of them. You can't, and you won't. And what you really may find is if you start to peel through, this is the most painful thing I've got, this is the second most painful, third most painful, at some point you'll start to see patterns, and then you may be able to hit something with like a collective set of solutions. But even if you're in like a no data spot or a data drowning spot, both of those you still need to ask yourself, what's the heaviest pressure point? And is there something inside that pressure point that I could sort of explore where technology can let me out of it? As an example, if you got zero data, I mean, one of the most fundamental things we've seen in any retail space is just getting a good picture of what your sales look like. Everything comes back down to that same core idea of, if I can't get a picture of what my sales trends look like, sales raw data, any of those things, then everything else that I could use technology for gets kind of lost in the works, because that's like number one variable in every other technological source there. If you're in a spot where you're drowning in your data, the number one thing you might say is like, what's the thing I wish I could do? Like, what's the action I wish I could take the most? And you may find out you don't need the data for that. Like, that's really become one of the big things that we're sort of looking at. There's all these actions that really are the things that move the needle. Like, the technology by itself doesn't move the needle. It's actions that come out of the technology. And so ask yourself, what are the things that you wish you could change or do? That may be something you don't even need the data for, or you may say, hey, this is what I need from the data before I can do the thing that I want to do. But it's ultimately about the outcome, the objective, the action that's the way to sort it out, in my opinion.
Fantastic. So for travel centers and truck stops essentially in our industry, if they're going to embrace one technology to augment, or as I like to say, redeploy, you referenced labor. So if we're going to redeploy labor, what is the one thing you think they should work on immediately? So again, not necessarily to replace labor, as you said, but to redeploy it or to augment it.
Right. I think, I mean, let me put through some layers here, because I think there's a couple of layers. One of them is, I still think the point of sale space is probably the place that needs the most revolution. And I say that as somebody who doesn't really provide point of sale. It's more that, like, because that stuff feeds into almost all the other questions that we're chasing, like the more fragmented that is, the more sort of fog of war there is inside that space, the harder time you're gonna have chasing anything else. The second part is that if you say, okay, well then what am I gonna do with that? You know, obviously demand responsiveness is probably still the number one challenge that most people face. Like, how do I have the people there to meet the demand at those peak performance times? Because everything else we could talk about, if we talk about food production, or if we talked about speed of service, or we talked about any of the, what we might call the qualitative experiences of our store, have direct correlations to demand. Well, that means that I'm back here at the point of sale, trying to see what my patterns of demand look like, and then I'm trying to solve in correspondence to that. And there's a million ways we can do that, but the starting point is to start to see what the foot traffic and sales traffic look like through our stores, and then start to ask ways in which we'd like to respond to those different, either qualitative or quantitative things we want to act out of that. That said, I mean, I think that means that first question you have to be able to answer for yourself is, can I see an actual demand pattern inside my store? What my heartbeats look like? If you can get traffic or heat patterns, that's even more amazing, because you start to see, okay, look, food gets hit hard at this time, you know, shower stations get hard at this time. All of those pieces, they're essentially about trying to be able to see the field so you can play the field. And so I would say that's number one thing is, can you see the field, or are you sitting in fog of war? Because if you're in fog of war, it doesn't matter what solutions you want to chase. You don't know how to act on them.
So certainly customer expectations have changed related to technology. They were moving in that direction pre-COVID, and now with COVID,
Yeah.
It's just pushed it really forward. What do you think some of the biggest changes are going to be from a customer expectation of technology when they visit travel centers and truck stops?
I think when we get into that one, COVID's been weird because it amplified things, right? So COVID's like drinking. You know, like, it doesn't necessarily change the nature of reality. It just sort of makes things louder, makes lights brighter, makes you seem cooler than you actually are. So in the same way, COVID's kind of done the same thing. It's amplifying trends that we already saw in the consumer space. Some of that's a little bit of there's a weird tendency in consumer space where we say, sometimes people don't want to talk to anybody, right? And so like what COVID did was, now I've got more reasons to like create space between me and you. And so some of that got amplified. But some examples that I think have been there for, like you say, hey, last 10, 12 years that are just getting more and more and more intense, is there's a basic consumer expectation that you have the thing I want when I want it. And there's still a tremendous number of retail providers who aren't using any kind of solid supply chain technology to make sure that they're meeting the demand that's coming into the store. And I'll give you my number one big example from the last 10 or 15 years of my life is, I've had a lot of children. I've got 5 children. I love my kids. They're great. But when you have a new baby, you can't sleep and you're tired, and then you got to go get on the road. So my number one objective anytime we got on the road was, I want one of those little 8.7 ounce original flavor of Red Bull. Like, that's what I wanted. I wanted 2, and I wanted the 8.7 ounce, and I wanted the original flavor because I like the children's chewable Tylenol flavor. That was my preference. And what I found was, I could not get into a travel center or store that had the original flavor with sugar in it, right? Like, that's what I wanted. They would always be out. And all I could think was, why are you always out? This is a very simple question. What's my basic safety stock? What's my demand pattern look like? This is not an uncommon, this is the original flavor, right? This isn't like, I mean, the coconut and some of those exciting things that have come along through the years, that's great. But the original flavor, why can't we keep that in stock? Why do I have the mentality that says, when I go into a store, it should always have what I want when I want it? It's because if I go online and I go to Amazon, I can find anything I want when I want it, and it will be there and it'll be in stock. Now, COVID kind of went and disrupted that in other ways, but I think made us more insecure about that tendency, not less, you know, like most people go, oh, now you have some perspective. You don't take things for granted. It's like, no, actually now you're almost more clutching onto, I will be able to get the toilet paper when I go to the store. And you're like hanging on to this idea that, like, I know they're going to have my product. They will not be out of grape nut flakes. There will not be a supply chain crisis anymore. I can't handle it. So I still think that's a core thing, right? There's these expectations that says, When I come in and I want something, I want it to be there. And what we see is that consumer loyalty gets really tied still to basic product supply chain. Like, will I show up at your store again? Depends on whether you're going to have the stuff I want when I want it, right?
That's really awesome. So let's do a little bit of a change up. What do you think these changes, or even any future changes that we might not even address today, how is that going to impact our relationships with our customers in the future?
Yep. I think the number one thing is getting people out of the dumb things that are really waste of time for them, so they can do the things that sometimes are not very glamorous, but are really critical to customer loyalty and repeat transactions, right? So as an example, we can do automatic air fresheners. Those are great. It's nice that every so many minutes you'll hear the, and all of a sudden there's a little bit nice refresher. What they can't tell you is that somebody stopped at commode number 3, right? And they're not going to unrock that bad boy. Like, that somebody's got to go make that happen. That's not a real exciting trend, but if that guy's too busy still checking in the Pepsi vendor, then you're still stuck in this spot where it takes a much longer period of time for them to get back there to the toilet number X, get toilet number X back in a resolved status, so that when somebody comes in and goes, look, I've been on the road a really long time, I really just need to use the facilities, and you stop and you go, I'm not using that one, or I'm not coming back to this place ever again. This is like the worst toilet in Scotland or something. Like, that's what you got to avoid. But those kinds of interactions, both the ones that are not very glamorous and the ones that really are better, like, hey, I'm looking for this. I'm on the road. I need this particular piece of kind of arcane merchandise. I need this piece of hardware for CB radio. I need whatever. Those things are kinds of things where you're not going to go browse for those things. You need to talk to a human. They're going to help you point to the right direction to find that stuff. And if we free them up for that, if we eliminate what we call the back office, we eliminate these sort of what I might call the useless processes where we're not good at that stuff, more chance for my people that I'm paying to go do those things.
I'd like to touch base on one thing you said about how important the human aspect is. Observational analysis is something that I think is critically important. And I think as a lot of companies focus a lot on technology, they're kind of losing that. And I would like your thoughts on an example I'm going to give you. We were asked to go out and visit a very sophisticated operator and do a review of their store. And one of the things we found that early in the morning, 6 or 7 o'clock, they had no breakfast items available. They were using an automated bill-to system, and it started producing their breakfast program, for lack of better words, in the grab and go section around 8 o'clock. And they were referencing that, oh, it's not really a good program for us. We're not really selling a lot. And in our observations, when we're at the stores, we're in there late night, early morning, we're like, well, most of your traffic, your truck traffic, is already left your lot by about 7 o'clock. So it's obviously no wonder you're not selling a lot of breakfast items. And of course, the data they were looking at was, well, we don't need a lot of breakfast items at 8 o'clock. Well, of course, your customer base had already left and so forth.
They're gone.
So can you kind of speak a little bit more to the importance of observational analysis, using that human aspect with the technology?
Yeah, I think it's funny. Like, one of the thoughts I kept coming back to was technology can find that something's broken. Technology is not good at fixing the broken thing, right? And so, as an example, one of the things that humans are always great, even when it's a human technology partnership, humans are really great at telling you when people are incompetent. So one of the things that we found in supply chain technology, for example, is that if you injected yourself in the store, the manager would always know the stuff that their people were doing wrong. And so as an example, they'd be like, oh yeah, but that suggestion from the algorithm is not ever going to be good, because we know that everybody's cross-ringing that with the other item because the price book's not working for this item. And you go, hang on. It's cool that you know that. It's cool that you can fix that before that turns into something bad, but you also got to find a way to get the feedback loop back through the whole system. So, but the reality was they could see it, right? They could see the problem. They knew the problem was there, and they could see through the blind spots that the technology had. And so, like your example, knowing what your traffic patterns look like, sometimes the technology is going to keep perpetuating something that exists already, unless the technology can nudge the human and say, hey, human who sees things that I don't see, do you see anything that would suggest that I refactor my direction, right? Like, how do I course correct? And humans can course correct really good volume-based technology, suggested ordering, production planning, any of those things like that. You never take the human completely out and black box it, because they're going to see, oh man, I could sell so much more. These guys are coming and saying, hey, you don't have any hot dogs? No, I don't have any hot dogs. Hey, you don't have any breakfast tacos? No, I don't have any breakfast tacos. We should probably start earlier. Well, you start earlier, you start to feed the machine. And as you feed that machine, then the machine can keep it going. The machine can make it thrive, but he couldn't get it started in this place where there was no seed planted yet. And so that observational analysis, whether that's like knowing what dumb things are happening in my stores, knowing I got a problem or a broken system, knowing what, what my people are doing wrong, what I've done wrong, all those are places to kind of course correct what the technology can be good at too. Doesn't mean the technology won't be able to detect it, but a lot of times it's not going to know how to, okay, great. We know something's wrong. What do we do now?
It's no different than the old days when you used to do manual bill twos, right? If you didn't adjust your manual bill twos, you were still out of those Red Bulls, regardless.
Yep.
Right.
And
so
go ahead. No.
Please.
Yeah, I was just going to say, but at the same time, you get a great tool now, and you give no human impact in that at all. You don't let them fix something if something goes south. Then the system goes, well, nobody's selling anything at that time. So an example, some of our algorithms inside PDI are really simple algorithms. The smarts behind them actually wind up being in the data analysis to find where something looks squirrely. So as an example, we have what's called a ghost out of stock that we detect in our supply chain system. Well, ghost out of stock says you have plenty according to the system, but based on the behavior of the item over a pattern, we know the pattern has changed in a way that suggests that actually something in the data is wrong. And those kinds of detections are great, but they also typically nudge a human and say, hey, go help me out. Help me get back on track now.
Cool. So the last question for today is, as these shifts are happening, what type of training are folks going to need to look at doing? What should they start doing? Let's say folks that don't have big budgets, right? They want to be sophisticated, but they don't have the resources. So what are some of the things they need to start looking at right now?
Yeah, I and maybe this is snobbery because I love inventory. Like I love stuff coming in and out. I feel like it's the most concrete part of store operations. But I almost always come back to this place that if you don't have something in your inventory or your supply chain, you're missing out on one of the easiest opportunities to change the world. Now, you're never going to stop, right? You can talk to a really fantastic operator and you go, hey, what's the thing you have to invest the most effort into? And they're going to say inventory discipline. But at the end of the day, that becomes the thing that has the best return on investment because it keeps essentially the main function of your business going, which is sales. And so if you get your inventory square, then your sales are going to increase, or at least you're going to maintain a baseline. That always comes back to baseline. Like that's the place you go and say, hey, this is the place we could change the world a little bit. If you got one thing, that's what I'd chase.
Okay. Excellent.
Hey guys.
So I just want to let you know I'm sorry. Oh, you're back in. So I'm just going to let you know, Justin, I thought the presentation was fantastic. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Justin. How can people get a hold of you if they want to ask you any questions about PDI?
Yeah, so if you want to reach out to me, you can reach me at jbaxley@pdisoftware.com. That's probably the best.
Okay, awesome. All right. Thanks, everyone. We'll be back tomorrow, same time, same place with DES talking about merchandising post-pandemic. Bye, guys. Thank you.